Hello everyone and welcome to Express Healthcare webinar series on healthcare transformations in a post-COVID-19 world held in association with AHPI. The topic for today's webinar is Telehealth, Best Practices and Key Learnings, Medico-Legal Aspects. As we remain in lockdown mode thanks to COVID-19, there is no doubt that teleconsulting, telemedicine or e-health, call it what you may, will be part of the new normal in the post-COVID-19 world. But while we work in emergency mode, are we laying the right foundations for the ethical practice of telemedicine in tune with the regulations and guidelines? As healthcare practitioners scale up their practice to reach out to existing as well as new patients through telehealth, are they aware of the medico-legal aspects and challenges? So how can we address these gaps? In today's webinar, we have two of the earliest practitioners of telemedicine in India, two doctors who have had more than 6 decades of clinical experience between them in their respective areas of expertise. They have also been educating other practitioners and hospitals, as well as helping online health portals to draft their consents and MOUs. Our speakers for today are Dr. H.S. Chabra, Chief of Spine Services and Medical Director, Indian Spinal Injury Center, New Delhi, and Dr. P.K. Kohli, Dean, Medical Education and Medico-Legal Consultant with Niyati Medicity, Mathura. The house rules. Before I hand over to our speakers, I need to quickly go over some house rules. While we solve this technical detail, let us move on to the first poll for today. The first poll is up on your screen. What are the common questions that you have about telehealth? Is it legal? Which questions or conditions should I treat with telehealth? What is the ability? Please choose any one of the options and we will reveal the results at the end of a minute. Hello?
Can you hear me? Just go ahead, Viveka. Let me not disturb the program. There's some technical issue here. Please go ahead.
Okay. So while we are waiting for the results of the poll, the results of the poll show that around 29%, the most common question is, how do I go about building a program? The second most is it legal? So I think our two presenters for today have a very good idea of what attendees of this webinar would like to get out of their sessions and their presentations. So without any further delay, we will move on to the first presentation for today and our first presenter, who is Dr. H.S. Chabra. As I was saying, he has more than 25 years of clinical and academic experience as an orthopedic surgeon. His organization is a member of the Telemedicine Society of India and has been running telemedicine services since March 2017, tele-rehabilitation since April 2015, and tele-nursing services since December 2019. He is also the chief coordinator and editor of elearnsci.org, a tele-education portal of the International Spinal Cord Society. And he's also the principal investigator of IDAP, which is the tele-research portal of the Indian Spinal Cord Society. Dr. Chabra, over to you and look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Viveka.
While your slides come up, I will just talk a little bit about your talk points for today. You're going to be talking about an enabler of how telemedicine is an enabler of healthcare access and affordability. Its special relevance in today, especially during the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic scenario, the national guidelines which have just been released by MCI and Niti Aayog, as well as the current scope, future potential, and limitations and possible solutions. So there is your presentation on it. Take it away, Dr.
Thank you, Viveka. I think we'll all be discussing on a very important topic, and we got an idea on what the participants want to hear from us. This is very much what we'll be covering over the next 30 minutes. When we talk about what telemedicine is, WHO defines it as the delivery of healthcare services where distance is a critical factor by all healthcare professionals using information and communication technologies for the exchange of valid information for diagnosis, treatment, and prevention of disease and injuries research and evaluation, and the continuing education of healthcare workers with the aim of advancing the health of individuals and communities. That's the WHO definition. Let's see how we go about it. There are other synonyms to telemedicine. Telehealth, e-health, online health are some of the other synonyms. Telemedicine can be an enabler of healthcare access and affordability. How? It increases the access to appropriate interventions through a faster access and access to services that may not otherwise be available. It reduces the financial costs associated with travel, reduces the inconvenience or impact to family and caregivers. It increases the likelihood of maintenance of records and documentation, thus minimizing the likelihood of missing out advice and also increasing the legal protection of both parties. Technologies can help patients adhere better to their medication and rehabilitation regimen, and telemedicine can also reduce the risk to both healthcare workers and patients, especially during pandemics. Why is there a need for telemedicine? We know that India is a land of diversity with a big population, but most of them spread in inaccessible and remote areas. And we know that there are very few doctors, only 2% of our doctors are in rural areas. The doctor-citizen ratio is lower than what is the WHO recommendation. There is a lack of skill training opportunities in India. And other than that, there is a lack of prevention knowledge, lack of follow-up care. And when it comes to scenarios like the current SARS-CoV-2 pandemic, telemedicine is particularly useful, and we can say we can tap the opportunity in the adversity through telemedicine. And coming to the question, are we geared to accept the telehealth model? If you go to villages, you have various internet connections which are available even in the remote corners of the country. And perhaps India is the largest user of mobiles across the globe. So we are geared for this. Where does telemedicine in India stand? The lack of awareness and acceptance of new technology, both by the public and professionals, are holding it back. But the government is now starting to take a keen interest in developing telemedicine practices. So the National Telemedicine Portal was launched even in 2013. Recently, the government of India launched the National Tele-consultation Center for COVID-19 at AIIMS. We also had the Telemedicine India guidelines released on 25th March 2020, as Viveka was referring to. Now, is teleconsultation valid only for follow-up consults, as was previously the norm? No, the present guidelines permit both first consult and follow-up consult. What kinds of teleconsults are permitted? You can have a patient to RMP, a caregiver to physician, physician to physician, or a health worker to physician consultations through telemedicine, and there is a provision for this in the guidelines. Generally, clinician to clinician telemedicine network is used for specialties like dermatology, radiology, surgical peer mentoring, emergency trauma, and ICU care. Clinician to patient is used for care for chronic conditions like diabetes, hypertension, medication management, wound care, counseling, post-discharge follow-up, and mental health. And patient to mobile health technology has been used for health education, monitoring of physical activity, monitoring of diet, medication adherence, and cognitive fitness. What are the various means of teleconsultation? You can have either a video consultation or an audio consultation or text consultation in the form of emails. In other words, there is either a real-time form of telemedicine like telephone or video conferencing, or there's a store and forward teleconsultation through emails or general post. Which drugs can be prescribed by the teleconsultant? There is a schedule of drugs which is listed in the various groups in the present guidelines. Group O can be prescribed through any form of consultation, and it generally includes commonly used over-the-counter medications. Group A is to be given only after video consultation and includes usually prescribed medications for which diagnosis is possible only by video consultation. And the group B, again for any form of consultation, are add-on medications which are used to optimize on existing conditions like hypertension, diabetes, etc. So you can find the list of medications in the guidelines and they are there on the internet for your use. Can we charge a fee for teleconsultation? The telemedicine consultation, as per the guidelines, should be treated in the same way as in-person consultations from a fee perspective. Payment can be taken either through payment gateway or payment systems or wallet, but a receipt or invoice should always be given whenever we charge for a teleconsultation. So there are various initiatives to make the RMP familiar with guidelines as well as the process and limitations of telemedicine practice. An online program will be developed by the Medical Council of India. All currently registered physicians need to complete an online mandatory course within 3 years of notification of the guidelines to provide consultation via telemedicine. Thereafter, undergoing and qualifying such a course will be essential prior to registration of any medical practitioner. The Telemedicine Society of India also has a course on which you can register and you get a certification for this, so people can make themselves aware about the various guidelines, etc. through this course. Where have we actually reached with telemedicine? The areas where telemedicine has proven to be an effective tool for reaching patient populations in various countries includes telemetry, mental health, and diabetes management. But it has been used in other areas also, like in Australia, in Queensland, a telepediatric service began as early as November 2000 and has now been integrated into the mainstream service. A centralized referral center has been developed in Brisbane and is available to selected regional sites throughout Queensland. Telepediatric referrals by calling a toll-free number can be set up, and specialist response is guaranteed within 24 hours of a referral, wherein the coordinator sets up a video conference call with the regional clinician or the referrer, the patient, and the family. So this has been ongoing since 2003. There are several secure and encrypted applications which have been developed and studied, such as MyDoc in Singapore. In UK, virtual fracture clinics are well established for a follow-up perspective and are encouraged by the Royal College of Surgeons clinical practice guidelines. And especially during the ongoing pandemic, the British Orthopedic Association has come out with BOST guidelines recommending the changeover of most, if not all, non-essential clinic visits to a virtual outpatient fracture clinic setup. And this has been validated by various studies also. A 2018 article proved an excellent agreement between physical examination and video-assisted consultation for adolescent patients undergoing knee arthroscopy. Patient outcomes such as knee range of movements after arthroplasties can also be assessed and monitored remotely without the need for hospital visits using technologies such as wearable sensors and video conferencing tools. Technology-assisted rehabilitation like online educational platforms or game-based therapy help in improving patient outcomes. Teleeducation has also got a big thirst, especially during this present pandemic, where there has been so many webinars which have been going. There has been an explosion of online education through national and international web portals. Viveka referred to elearnsi.org. This is a teleeducation tool launched in 2012 in London. It is a web resource which allows professionals and various disciplines involved in spinal cord injury management to have thorough knowledge on all aspects of spinal cord injury management through 7 modules and 88 sub-modules, each module having a presentation giving an overview of the topic, activity-based learning exercises, references, and self-assessment questions. There are almost 60,000 users from 186 countries for this resource, and various MOOCs are carried out. So this shows the potential of such tele-education portals. You can also carry out tele-research, like we did one on smartphone app in self-management of chronic low back pain, a randomized controlled trial. Similarly, Viveka referred to the International Spinal Cord Society's pilot project to set up a database. We know that there is a dearth of knowledge about the epidemiology of spinal cord injuries, especially from emerging countries, and this was made especially to improve things in this regard. After the pilot project, we have gone on to increase the reach to across the globe, and this database project is functional now, gathering very valuable data from across the globe. At Indian Spinal Injury Center, we've been using teleconsultations through WhatsApp, Skype, Zoom, and a TCS platform. We started tele-rehabilitation as early in April 2015 and telenursing in December 2019. And we've been having tele-education since May 2018 also. However, there are various limitations also of telehealth, like the lack of skills for teleconsultation among the consultants. So this is being overcome through various training courses, as we discussed. Many clinical signs are difficult to demonstrate via video conferencing and without a doctor on the other side. And especially the feel of an organ palpation cannot be obtained by telemedicine. But this could be overcome by having a local physician to serve as an interface. The legal implications are not clear on certain models of telehealth. I'm sure Dr. Kohli will be covering this, but this will evolve with time. Also, face-to-face interactions can never be replaced by telemedicine, as treatment is not merely prescribing medicines. However, one form is not meant to replace the other. Both should complement each other, and this perception will change with time, as has been there for online education. So there are indications that very few telemedicine projects emerge beyond the trial phase to become part of a mainstream health service. The barriers are mainly technically challenged staff, resistance to change, cost, reimbursement, age of the patient, and level of education of the patient. The top barriers are generally technology specific and can be overcome through training, change management techniques, alternating delivery by telemedicine, and personal patient to provider interaction. There's several barriers can be eliminated by focused policy. The ubiquitous presence of high-speed bandwidth would help bridge a geographical gap of medical access in rural settings. This is very important. And as per this editorial, the real potential continues to be hampered by quick fix technological solutions rather than a genuine investment in evaluative research and development. Thus, we should focus on clinical problems first, with careful consideration given to the significant organizational changes that are associated with the introduction of a new method of service delivery. It should be clear what the problem is, how telemedicine may help, and how it will complement existing services. So it is very important. And there are various areas for research thus that we could work on how to improve telemedicine, which is certainly to grow in the future because of continuous innovation in the consumer technology market, continuous advancement in electronic health records, projected shortages in the health professional workforce, reorganization in the delivery and financing of medical care, and growth of consumerism in healthcare with increasing public expectations for convenient and real-time access to health services. Thus, we are sure that the entire telehealth model, including all components of telehealth, will get implemented. Like also for tele-education, there could be online courses, structured short-term training programs, online clinical skills workshop based on simulation, integrated artificial intelligence platforms, and e-learning remote classrooms. Thus, to conclude, telemedicine provides healthcare where there is none and improves the healthcare where there is some. Thank you for your patience, and we'll be happy to answer questions subsequently during the question and answer session. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chabra, for your insights and giving us a grounds-up view on how telemedicine is practiced in India, as well as the future of the telehealth model. I'd like to just inform the people who are putting questions to us to kindly address it to a particular doctor so that we'll know whom to put the question to. I now move on to the second poll, which is coming up on your screen. And there it is. What, according to you, are the main barriers to the adoption of telemedicine? You have your options there. Please choose one of them so that we can give you the results in under a minute. And while we wait for the results, I'll quickly read out a short biodata of our next speaker, who is Dr. P.K. Kohli, who is the Dean, Medical Education and Medical Legal Consultant with Niyati MedCity, Mathura. He has more than 4 decades of experience as a surgeon. He has held senior positions in various hospitals, also ran his own surgical hospital, and he has been educating medical professionals and hospitals to utilize telemedicine as a node of practice, both in clinical work as well as medical education, training, and upskilling. He's also been associated with several online health portals, drafting their consents and MOUs. Waiting for the poll results. While we wait for the poll results, I'd also like to, there we have the poll results coming up. 50% say resistance to change is the main barrier to the adoption of telemedicine. Sinks in with what Dr. Chabra had in his presentation. The next is limitation of physical examination, and followed by technically challenged staff. Dr. Kohli, the views of that poll really are in sync with what we are discussing today. And over to you. Look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Viveka. I'll focus myself on medico-legal aspects of telemedicine. As you know, telemedicine is the clinical component of telehealth, and since the medico-legal issues are mostly related to the clinical component, I'll be mostly talking about telemedicine. These are my talk points: regulatory compliances related to telehealth, medico-legal concerns of telemedicine, medico-legal aspects of telemedicine hurriedly cobbled up during the period of COVID pandemic, and medico-legal aspects in the post-COVID phase. Coming to regulatory compliances, there is no codified law on telemedicine in India as yet. There are some observations made by the Supreme Court and the High Courts off and on the subject. Medical Council of India, in collaboration with Niti Aayog, has come up with guidelines on telemedicine on 25th of March 2020, and recently amended some three days ago. These have been included in the Indian Medical Council Professional Conduct, Etiquette and Ethics Regulation 2002 as Annexure 5. There will be some amendments in future, and we may get a coded statute in future. These are some of the laws applicable in telemedicine: Indian Medical Council Regulations 2002, Drugs and Cosmetics Act, NDPS Act, Clinical Establishments Act, Information Technology Act, and the Epidemic Diseases Act as amended in 2020. Now, coming to medico-legal concerns in telemedicine, this slide shows the most important ones: patient autonomy, data confidentiality, privacy of interactions, data protection. These are largely specific to and are more important in telemedicine as compared to the conventional practice. Then you have negligence, deficiency of care, misconduct as for in-person consults. Identification of the patient is important as given in the guidelines of the MCI. Name, age and sex, parentage, address, contact number, email ID and hospital ID number has to be given. This basic identification may be recorded at the time of registration itself. For minors, the accompanying adult guardian needs to be identified. The patient's preference for the doctor to be consulted should also be noted. For audiovisual live consult, the time slot may also be booked for the convenience of both the parties. This should be followed by a deposit of the prescribed fee before the confirmation note is sent by SMS. Identification of the doctor. A doctor needs to be identified during the consult as well as on the prescription slip. Name of the doctor, designation and specialty, and his MCI registration number is the basic information required. Any other relevant information sought by the patient may also be given if desired. Consent is mandatory for telemedicine, whether implied as when patient initiates the interaction, or explicit when it is initiated by the doctor or the healthcare worker or the patient attendant. If the prescription is being sent directly to a pharmacy, the patient must consent for it, as he has a freedom of choice from where to get his medicines. If the patient is consulting through some healthcare worker, the patient should expressly consent for the consult through him. This consent will be for sharing the history, getting physical examination by him, and disclosure of the advice in his presence. Digital signatures are permissible as per MCI guidelines. Privacy, confidentiality, and security are the most important medico-legal concerns of telemedicine. Privacy, as you know, is the ability of an individual to control the use and dissemination of information that relates to himself. Right to privacy is now a fundamental right in India. If he shares this information with another person, the other person is expected to keep it confidential unless permitted by him. Privacy protects the access to the person, while confidentiality protects access to the data. Security involves protection of privacy and confidentiality at endpoints as well as during storage. Storage protection includes measures for storage, access, retrieval, sharing, encryption, and court-mandated reproduction of the confidential data and images. It also includes training as well as policies, safeguards, and technologies like firewalls and encryption. Privacy concerns that normally pertain to conventional medical practice tend to get magnified in telemedicine arena, or may even be different in character altogether. This technology is also threatened by potential unauthorized intrusion, such as computer hackers, who could possibly gain access to and even alter patient records. In an AV session, the doctor may face his own privacy issues. His own content, mannerism, expressions, and reactions during the AV session will become part of the record whether he likes it or not. Even on telephonic consult, the recording will capture the conversation in toto. From the patient perspective, the patient may not be able to see who else is viewing the session along with the clinician. The use of telemedicine equipment usually adds an IT manager to the typical doctor-patient encounter. He automatically becomes privy to the consultation. The organization should take a written declaration from him for the safeguards. If the activity is outsourced, a formal MOU and NDA must be signed. Now, what are the records to be preserved? Patient records, prescriptions, referrals, diagnostic reports, and images, whatever has been interacted with, whatever has been exchanged during the encounter need to be preserved. Logs of telemedicine interaction like phone logs, AV logs, email records, text records must all be preserved. It is not mandatory to preserve the entire footage of the audio and video chats. Logs are enough. If you do preserve it, you have to ensure that it is not accessed by unauthorized persons. If all due precautions have been taken, but without your knowledge, some data is accessed and misused by a third person, it will amount to data theft, in contrast to when you were instrumental in sharing that data yourself. These are some examples of misconduct during telemedicine. insisting on telemedicine when the patient is wanting an in-person consultation, interrupting the consultation without intimation, not refunding the charges for a cancelled consult, misusing patient images and data, especially private and sensitive in nature, like uploading on social media without permission, prescription not following the prescribed format, prescribing medicines from the restricted list, not disclosing your identity or details regarding your credentials and MCA registration number, soliciting patients for telemedicine through advertisements or inducements, exaggeration or falsehoods through advertisements. A word of caution: careless or negligent advice or prescription in telemedicine mode may attract action as in conventional interaction. So be brief and to the point with proper expressions and content. The advice should be carefully worded with recommendation for in-person consult wherever needed. In telephonic consult, always presume that the patient is also recording the conversation. Marketing practices, if in violation of the MCA ethical code, may attract action. There should be clear MOU and NDA with the third parties having access to the patient data and images. Patient consent, terms and conditions, and disclaimers should be properly worded. Observe confidentiality, privacy, and data protection. Extra caution is required in cases of mental illness, assault cases, drug abuse, and other sensitive matters with a social stigma attached to them. The technology-based platforms, websites, and mobile apps which facilitate telemedicine also have to follow these guidelines. It is prudent to have a proper MOU and NDA with them. Technology platforms based on artificial intelligence or machine learning are not allowed to counsel the patients or prescribe any medicines. A doctor can, however, take assistance from such technologies, but the consultation with the patient and the prescription should always be delivered by the doctor himself. A grievance redressal mechanism should also be put in place. During COVID-19, telemedicine has suddenly attracted the attention of the MCI as well as the hospitals and doctors, as it has served to reduce the demand on hospital resources. Some teething troubles, technical, medical, and legal, are being faced. This requires a good and efficient software, appropriate safeguards, and good training and rehearsals by doctors and staff. Disputes may be related to the manner and content of the advice, delays, system failures, inability to upload images, fee, and so on. There is understandable confusion among doctors and patients over what privacy and security protections are required, or what records are to be preserved, or on the reliability of advice in the absence of physical examination, as well as on the logic and amount of professional fee in virtual consultations. A rush to start new telemedicine applications can lead to overlooking supposedly unimportant aspects. This may result in system failures, poor screen conduct, or violations of confidentiality and privacy laws. However, some gaps here and there may be excused in view of the current extraordinary situation, but major violations during the phase of Epidemic Diseases Act may attract serious action, especially if the advice given is contrary to the government advisories. In the post-COVID era, confidentiality, privacy, and security issues will be in the forefront of disputes related to telemedicine. The doctor-patient relationship establishes an implied contract of confidentiality. The doctor tries to help a patient after collecting and analyzing his otherwise private information. Sharing this information with his team members and the dispensing chemist is acceptable, but sharing this information with any third person unconnected with his treatment or care without his consent violates the ethical standards and is actionable. The data and images used for conferences, meetings, and publications should either be encrypted or used with the patient's written consent. There is also a market for direct or indirect monitoring, care, and treatment related to non-ambulatory patients, care of appliances and devices, vital signs, ECG, pulse oximetry, blood sugar, and other point-of-care assessments, follow-up care, physiotherapy, rehabilitation, and so on. These require much more care and caution, even if it is through some healthcare worker assisting the patient. We must ensure that the transmission of information is encrypted and that the endpoints where telemedicine transmissions begin and end are secured. Terms and conditions, consent, and disclaimers should be properly worded, and their acceptance should be a prerequisite for the registration process. Now, facility-to-facility interactions. Telemedicine can be very useful for the patients being treated at smaller or peripheral hospitals. The VC sessions may be held as a routine ward round of the admitted patients by the remote specialist or SOS encounters as and when required. This will greatly reduce the physical movement of patients to a higher center in many cases. This collaboration may be a point-to-point model or a hub-and-spoke model. In such collaborations, there should be a proper MOU and NDA contract signed between the parties involved. This should clearly define the roles and responsibilities, safeguards, accountability, and sharing of fee, besides other clauses. During audio-visual consultation, no third person should be allowed to access the same. Team members, if present, should be specifically introduced and reasons given for their presence. They are acceptable unless the patient specifically objects to them. For example, a patient of morbid obesity is seeking consultation for surgery. It will be acceptable if the dietitian, internist, physiotherapist, anesthesiologist are also present. Such multidisciplinary consult will be very useful before planning a physical visit to the hospital. A word about teleconsultation charges. There is no reason why professional fee should not be charged. The fee is for the time, experience, and skill used to provide the healthcare service. The actual amount charged is the prerogative of the doctor or hospital giving the consultation. Receipt, however, should always be issued. There may be a variety of charges, including additional charges for uploading of images and data beyond a limit. There may be a different set of charges for follow-up consult, referral consult, and multidisciplinary consult. There should be some policy and protocol for waiver of charges, cancellations, and refunds. Disputes can be avoided if there is transparency, honesty, and sensitivity in handling the issue of charges. Advertisement and marketing. There is obviously a need to inform the public about the availability and scheduling of telemedicine service. It should contain essential protocols, flowcharts, time slots, and limitations of AV and other consults. Charges should be clearly displayed. However, exaggerations, large photographs of doctors, and unsubstantiated claims should be avoided, as it can attract action by the MCI. So in conclusion, I would like to stress that telemedicine, teleeducation, teleconferencing is likely to be the new normal in healthcare. Make the best use of this opportunity. It has a lot of advantages for both parties if used in a prudent manner. It has its own limitations and risks, medical, legal, and ethical. We need to adapt and upgrade our hospital infrastructure, equipment and training, and streamline the systems and protocols for the same. Proper protocols and sincere training will take care of the medico-legal issues related to telemedicine. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kohli, for your insights on the medico-legal aspects of telehealth. We now lead to the audience seed Q&A round, and I open it up for the questions. The first question which has come is from Mr. Manivanan. Has any study on the cost of care through telemedicine been done? Also, what is the expected cost savings on the cost of treatment for a hospital? Any number crunching done? Also from Mr. Manivanan. He's not indicated to whom, so perhaps we can go first with you, Dr. Chabre, and then move to Dr. Kohli. Dr. Kohli, perhaps you can take the question while Dr. Chabra's audio problem is sorted.
Yeah, see, I'm not aware of any formal studies having been done, but it makes a lot of sense. There is a lot of saving on transportation, moving through thick traffic jams and waiting in the waiting halls. There is a lot of cost saving, particularly for the patient. Also, it for the doctors and hospitals, it reduces a lot of demands on the hospital resources. So there is obviously cost saving on both the fronts, but I'm not aware of any formal studies having been done.
Okay,
Yeah,
I suppose it's still, yeah, still nascent days in India. Yes, Dr. Chabra, you can chime in.
Yep, I also did not come across any study in the literature review, but I think there are some things which do not require any studies, like you don't need a study to prove that a parachute helps when you jump off there. So you are saving costs with regard to travel, with regard to accommodation. You are saving indirect costs on the travel time, and you are saving a lot of the family precious time which is there. Also, the doctors and the hospital staff, the cost to the hospital is also reduced. So I think if we do a study on cost effectiveness, it will definitely be in favor of telemedicine. Though there are some limitations that we talked about, but wherever, especially for follow-up consults, it is particularly useful. And if we can have a referral network where a physician interacts with the expert in specialities, like was the Queensland model for a telepediatric service, there you particularly save costs in this regard.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Chabra. And moving to the next question from Bharat Vasandani. This is for Dr. Kohli. What is the process or framework to store medical data for patients so that it can be shared by the patients to other stakeholders, such as for the second medical opinion, prescriptions for medicines, etc.? For Dr. Kohli.
See, the data of patient A cannot be shared with any other third person. There is an understanding and, in fact, implied contract between the patient and the hospital that the data stored in the hospital will not be shared by any third person. In case you do want to share it with third person for whatever reason, you have to take the permission of the consent of the patient concerned. So many a times when we tend to have data shared for research or academic purposes, the hospitals tend to take a consent during the admission itself that the data may be used for advancement of science or for research and so on. Otherwise, whenever it has to be shared with a third person, it has to be done with the consent of the patient.
Okay.
Viveka,
Yes, please.
I think the question was more towards the other side, how the patient can share it with other stakeholders, if I'm not wrong on that, like the patient may need to share it with the insurance for reimbursement. But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Kohli, but we do not have proper guidelines, or the insurance still does not reimburse it within India per se. So we still, there's still no clear-cut regulations in this regard with the insurance.
See, the patient's data, he is the owner of that data. The hospital is the custodian. He can share it with anybody he likes. If the insurance company asks the hospital for the patient's data, the authorization of the patient is required. But if the patient wants to share it with the insurance company or anybody else, it's his choice.
But I don't think there are any clear-cut directives that the insurance will cover for a teleconsultation. Are you aware about that?
No, I'm not aware of that.
Can I come in?
Sure, sir.
Yes,
Sure,
Dr.
sir.
Alex. Yes, please come.
Yeah, we have just been, we have written to the IRA and asked them to bring in some guidelines. And Star Insurance has come forward. We're in the process of setting up guidelines for reimbursement of teleconsultations.
Right.
Okay, okay. Thanks, Dr. Alex. Yeah, that adds some context to it. The next question that we have are, what are the ambiguities in our guidelines or laws for telehealth, telemedicine practice in India? From Lakshmi. I think both Dr. Chabra and Dr. Kohli can take it, and Dr. Alex also, you can add your perspectives to it.
Dr. Kohli, would you want to go first?
I think the guidelines given by the MCI were very elaborate and very clear. I don't see many ambiguities there. But I'm sure as we go along, any ambiguities that are faced will be cleared through amendments or maybe a codified law. There is not much of ambiguity to discourage us from using this mode of practice.
Yep, I agree with Dr. Kohli, but I also think that things will evolve and guidelines will need to evolve with time. If we look especially at the list of medicines which can be prescribed, we are not sure on a large list of medicines which we commonly use in our day-to-day practice, and there is some ambiguity on which we can clearly use. Though they say that Schedule X drugs can't be used, but when you see the group O or A or B, they're mainly for medicines which are used for chronic diseases rather than, for example, if the patient has an acute episode of a leg pain or a back pain, whether we can use them or not. But I'm sure things will evolve. I think the guidelines also need to see, even though there's a provision for it, but we need to also see how we can facilitate a network throughout the country such that referral services where we benefit the most because of the scarcity of specialists in the country, especially in rural areas. So there needs to be some more clarity on that, especially though there are provisions for it, but I think we may need to evolve with time.
Yeah, if I may add, I think this has been a big breakthrough. AHPI and the Telemedicine Society, Harvinder will know, we have been trying to introduce telemedicine, teleconsultation for the last 3 years. And one of the good things that has happened during the COVID pandemic is this step of allowing telemedicine. And I think now that the government has realized how useful it is an evolving situation, and we'll work together with the government to ensure that medicine is made accessible to the remote areas and that hospital systems are not stressed with unnecessary physical visits.
Thank you, Dr. Alex. One question that we have next from the audience from Dr. Siraditya Balial. How do we use telemedicine procedure from house to the chamber patients? I think what it means is the doctors at home, how can they do telemedicine for patients who have come to their clinic, to their chamber?
May I? The procedure, I think, will remain the same, whether it would be a patient to physician teleconsultation, except that if the patient comes to the clinic, the doctor may have other aids to help him with the evaluation process, like there could be a nurse or other disciplines who would be available, or there could be a junior doctor. So one of the main limitations is the ability to be able to physically evaluate the patient, and this limitation gets resolved if you have the patient coming to the clinic, because you can then have somebody quickly evaluate the patient and share the details with the expert who can then give his recommendations to the patient. I hope I've been able to answer that.
I would like to add a little bit. See, the fact that the patient has come to the clinic, that means he has come for an in-person consultation with a consultant. So if the consultant is not there and he's at home, he'll have to counsel the patient that this is the situation. If he wants to manage with a teleconsultation with the help of a healthcare worker there or a junior doctor there giving the physical examination and the consultant trying to help him, if he agrees with that, then it's okay. But otherwise, if he still insists that he wants a in-person consultation, you better give him another appointment at your convenience.
I agree, Dr. Kohli, but the scenario may also be the chamber of another clinician, so that you can have a clinician to clinician consultation in this case. That was not specified, and that is one of the ways that you can resolve one of the main limitations, that you can have a clinician examine in the periphery, in the rural area, and interact with a specialist sitting in the city. So if that was the question. So I totally agree with you, but we have both the scenarios which are there.
Moving on then to the next question. Perhaps if both doctors could give a roadmap for a common physician to engage for telemedicine, what would be the steps in that roadmap? What is the documentation required that he has to keep ready to practice telemedicine?
So I will leave the documentation part on Dr. Kohli because that is also a medical legal component and very important. He also covered it in his talk. I think it is possible for every clinician, every physician to know that they can practice telemedicine from today, right now. They don't need any special privileges in this regard, and the guidelines of the government allow them to practice telemedicine as per the guidelines. They don't need very sophisticated portals, but there are portals available, so they can also tie up with various portals for that. All you need to do, the preferred technique is a video consultation, because there you have the possibility to evaluate better, and hence you can prescribe more medicines as per the guidelines as well. Most of the patients and physicians now have phones which are compatible with a video consultation, or you could have Zoom or Skype at your home to be able to do that. But even a teleconsultation is a kind of on a telephone, audio consultation is also a kind of telemedicine, but you have some limitations on the kinds of drugs that you can prescribe. And if you want to know how that you can get the payment from the patients in this regard, you have various wallets and other opportunities which you can use to charge the patient in this regard. But remember, as Dr. Kohli will let you know, documentation becomes essential. You can record it on your telephone or on your email, but if you charge, you should always send a receipt back to the patient. Over to Dr. Kohli.
You see, first thing that the doctor must remember is that telemedicine cannot be a replacement for the conventional practice. It supplements, it adds value to it, it helps you and the patient supplement the conventional practice. Number two, you should be clear about the guidelines. You must go through the guidelines word by word to make the concepts clear. You must also emphasize in your mind about the limitations. Every kind of patient cannot be treated through telemedicine. Emergencies particularly, you can't treat emergencies there. You can't treat complex cases. You can't perform any procedures. So you must be aware of the limitations of the procedure. Now, coming to the documentation, that's very important because as I said in my talk, a lot of disputes in telemedicine will be based on documentation, particularly the confidentiality and privacy issues and security issues. So you have to concentrate on them. The prescription part has been taken care of by the guidelines very well. There is a model prescription there which can be framed. You have to register the patients with all the patient identification. You have to identify yourself. And you must have a good, well-drafted terms and conditions and the disclaimers, which should be part of the registration process. I mean, acceptance of those terms and acceptance of the disclaimers should be a necessary prerequisite for the registration of the patient. And then about the availability of a good software, that's very important. Without good software, you'll have a lot of problems, a lot of system failures. And then you must have an MOU and a non-disclosure agreement with the third-party vendors if you have outsourced the IT component of the telemedicine, so that you have taken due precautions to prevent any security issues or confidentiality and privacy issues. So that I think is the way to move forward.
Okay.
I totally
Thank you,
agree.
Dr.
Viveka, just a point there. I think the
Yeah.
guidelines also emphasize that it is on the acumen of the physician to decide which cases can be managed through telemedicine and which needs an in-person consultation for sure. And this is very important to understand because your liability, medico-legal liability as a clinician remains the same as in a teleconsultation as an in-person evaluation. So you need to be very sure that this is the kind of person that I can evaluate through telemedicine, and if not, where you need to refer the patient or advise the patient for an in-person consultation. But the importance of, if you can't do an in-person consultation, is to involve other physicians. So the referral network that can be established is also very important. Yeah, back to Viveka.
Okay. Thanks, Dr. Chabra and Dr. Kohli, for giving us your perspectives on the questions. I'm afraid we can't take any more questions. We'll need to wrap this up. Before we wrap up and before I give my closing comments, Dr. Alexander Thomas, would you like to say something on behalf of AHPI, because you all are our co-organizers?
Well, thank you. I think it was a very interesting and, of course, a very webinar of very high standard, having two experts in the field. I think they probably have been working with telemedicine for a long, long time, and this is something that is the need of the hour. I think we need to figure out a way how to help our smaller hospitals get into the act. So thank you, Pramod, and thank you, Harvinder, for an excellent talk, and I'm sure this has benefited all the listeners. Thank you, Viveka, for being for hosting this.
Thank you, Dr. Alex. That's all the time that we have for today. I hate to cut this short, but if you have any further questions or wish to interact further, please leave a comment using the questions box and we will contact you post the webinar. Thank you, Dr. Chabra and Dr. Kohli, once again for sharing your thoughts and insights on telehealth, best practices, key learnings, and medico-legal aspects. This webinar was brought to you by Express Healthcare in association with AHPI. We've had many participants from industry logging in for today's webinar. Thank you for your time, and we are sure the insights will be of great value to you.